Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next in our series of Connected Conversations. We're really excited to have Mark Fields as our next guest today. Mark doesn't need an introduction. He, as you know, is a very well-known business leader, was the former CEO of Ford Motor Company, and is currently the chairman of the board of Planview as well. So Mark, welcome to Connected Conversations.
Great to be here, my friend.
Yeah, absolutely. So Mark, there's a lot going on in the economy and the world right
Sure
now with some of the macroeconomic uncertainties, the geopolitical uncertainties. Maybe a good starting point would be, what do you see shaping up in the world around us? And secondly, what do business leaders need to be thinking about in a time like this?
Yeah, well, as you know, it's a very interesting time right now. There's economic pressures, right? All the stimulus the governments have put in place over the last number of years, which has really stoked a lot of the money supply and asset values. That's now reversing itself.
Right.
You have a lot of geopolitical issues that are going on around the world, including obviously the war in Ukraine.
Yep.
So there's a lot of uncertainty, and if you look at that versus the past 4 or 5 years, it's a very different environment now. And I think for leaders, what's so important is, as leaders of whether you're leading a company or you're leading big parts of companies, it's really important for you to be focused on the external world, and then what does that mean for
Right.
your company? Because you really need to be the translator of what are all those external factors out there, and what does that mean for our business, and then how do we proactively prepare for that so that we're looking around the corner for things that are coming at us versus we're waiting till they're actually coming right at us, and then it's much more difficult to put plans together to try and mitigate, whether it's a bad economic environment or dislocations in the marketplace or the financial markets.
Right.
So really that external focus and then inwardly, what does that mean for us, I think is really important for leaders.
Yeah. So lots of uncertainty, potential headwinds in terms of slowdown, cost of capital going up. And in a time like this, really being prepared on all the external exogenous elements and really understanding what does that really mean for your business. And as you know, we're doing that for our own business
Right.
as well. So Mark, in a time like this, clearly, along with all the uncertainty, many industries, many companies are going through massive changes, right? Some of those changes are being caused by technology shifts.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those changes are being caused by, new and interesting operating or business models. Some of these changes are being caused by the next generation of the consumer and their preferences and sort of their asks. In a time like this, any organization needs to really develop a change and a transformation kind of an ethos, right?
Yep.
What do you see companies doing here? What are some of the key lessons learned? You've gone through a lot of transformation in your career. What can you share in terms of what are some of the key attributes of being able to transform and change?
Right, it's a great question. I think first and foremost, the most important thing is for companies to be able to, look out over the next couple of years and understand what are the big macro forces that are going to be changing their industry. And you mentioned a number of them. What are the customer trends? What are the technological trends? What are the competitor trends?
Right.
And be able to understand this as, okay, based upon those trends, as a business today, what impact will it have for us, not only today, but 3-4 years from now,
Right.
so that you can develop a plan that says, based on those big macro trends, where do we want to play, and then how do we want to win?
Right.
And I think, married to that is important for all leaders to communicate that to their organizations.
Right.
Right? Because, I've been in situations where when I was growing up in the auto industry, there were situations where a new strategy would come down from management.
Right.
And there was no context, at least for me and others in the organization,
Right.
that said, well, why are we going in that direction? So even before you kind of lay out your plans, whether it's you're continuing with your existing strategy, you're going to have some, differences in some of your strategic shifts, just being able to communicate to the organization the context for the environment so that if in fact you do have to put new elements of plans and strategies in place, people have an opportunity to say, that makes sense because I have the context for it. And a lot of times as leaders, we think communication happens, but it doesn't. And so you really have to over-index on that and be very transparent with the organization.
Yeah, totally agree. And it's really almost sort of like connecting your strategy and your priorities as an organization, as a leadership team, with what the teams really internalize at their individual level, right? And connecting the dots in both sides.
And I also think, to your point around these transformations that are happening, lesson learned that I've had. I have lots of experience, right? And experience is the name I give my mistakes. But don't try and boil the ocean. As you're looking to transform your business, pick your shots. Don't try and do everything, and be really clear up front of what is the problem or opportunity you're trying to solve for. And take those on in a digestible way for the organization. There's a great quote from Peter Drucker that I used at Ford a lot, which is, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so, the culture has to be right, and you have to take these things, like, as I said, in digestible forms and understand how far you can elicit change in the organization, where people really embrace it and then drive it, as opposed to doing everything at once and people just get overwhelmed.
That's a really good point, because prioritization, because part of strategy is also what you're not going to do, as much as it is about what you are going to do. That's the toughest question. And that's in my experience, has been the toughest thing, because it's always easier to do 20,000 things and to figure out what are the top 3 things to do, right?
It's always the most difficult things, what you're not going to do. But I also think it's really important for organizations, again, to get real clarity on what are the things that you want to do in a fairly defined period of time that people can understand, and they can, importantly, see progress along the way. Somebody once told me, when you're going through either a radical change or an economic down cycle, et cetera, everything in the middle looks like a failure, right? Because you're going through a lot of that change. But being able to lay those breadcrumbs out and saying, here's the progress that we're making on the journey that we're on, gives people a lot of encouragement.
That's part of the role of leadership, is to inspire people to come on that journey, right? So really interesting. Just a little bit more on the whole notion of making prioritization decisions, right? I'm sure you've seen this in your lifespan as well. In a lot of organizations, it's about who's shouting the loudest, and sometimes there's personal or specific functional agendas that come into play. What do you think is a good framework for companies to think about when they are deciding their priorities?
You're right. A lot of times organizations can literally get hijacked by individuals who, let's say, either speak the loudest or think they have the biggest clout, et cetera. I think the best things for CEOs and leaders to do is, again, getting back to what I mentioned earlier, which is laying out, what is the world going to look like in whether it's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years, whatever the time frame is, and bring your management team through an exercise of looking at those macro factors, and then agreeing on the where do we want to play and how do we want to win, and then what do you have to believe to make that happen. Because when you go through that process as a management team, you'll sort out all these, maybe personal agendas and things of that nature, but you keep it focused on the business, you keep it focused on consumer trends, technological trends, and you bring it back to what does it mean for strategy as a company, so that when you're having that discussion as a management team, it's not about who's the loudest voice or who thinks they have the most clout. It's around, hey, this is what's right for the company based on our strengths and opportunities and the capability that we have. And tied to that are things that we're not going to do, because just guess what? It just doesn't hit the priorities.
And that's very interesting, because part of what you're suggesting, which I can totally identify with, is to allow yourself time as a leadership team to have those discussions and those debates, to hash through a common lens for making those prioritization decisions, right? And the second thing that I sort of gathered from your comments was to focus it back on the outcomes you're trying to drive, right? And if you use that lens together with taking the time to have the discussion and debate, you probably will end up with a better approach to prioritizing. Yeah.
And it also, when you have that end in mind, then it gets to the communication to the organization. It says, this is where we're heading. Don't get distracted by, I won't say the day-to-day, because the day-to-day is really important. But you can really get distracted. I can tell you when we were going through the downturn in the auto industry around the Great Recession, we laid out a strategy at Ford, and it was tough times. Two of our main competitors went bankrupt, and I was leading a big portion of the business. And as a leader, some days you take a step forward, some days you take 2 steps back.
Right.
But you can't just live in the day and live those highs and lows of the emotions.
Yeah.
You have to keep an eye towards where are we heading, what are we trying to achieve. And I'm not a sailor, but it's like tacking back and forth. You're never going to get there in a straight line.
Yeah.
But it helps keep not only your sanity as a leader, it helps keep things in perspective so that when you're talking to your organization, you can motivate them and put it into perspective and be authentic to them and saying, here's the reality. The good news is, this reality is hitting all of our competitors. And it's going to come down to who are those companies that have the clarity of purpose and the motivated and skilled workforce to overcome that. It's not just that, unique to your company that times are tough or, things are happening.
Yeah. I dabble in sailing, and I think that's a great analogy, actually, because you've got, the mainsail, you've got the jib, and you've got the rudder, but you've got all kinds of wind moving in different directions, especially if you sail on Lake Michigan in Chicago, right? It comes in very unpredictable ways, and it's a great analogy for navigating through those kinds of environments.
And just to your point around, it takes time to spend with the management team. I learned that during my time in Japan. There's a term in Japanese called nemawashi, which is called planting seeds.
Yes.
And I always viewed the Japanese as, they took a long time to make a decision. Right. Well, guess what? I learned when I was running Mazda that I needed to do that to get the buy-in from the management team. Yes. And when we had the buy-in to the strategy and the plan, the execution was much faster because you didn't have the naysayers. So if you shortchange that process of developing the strategy and making it your team's plan as opposed to just your plan, you get much faster execution on the back end.
100% agree, and that's exactly been my personal experience and our experience here at Planview as well. Let me shift a little bit. One of the terms that gets thrown around a lot is agile. And everyone aspires to be agile. And I've in the last 25 years of my career, I've always aspired to be more agile. And many companies are on that agile transformation journey. What in your mind defines an agile organization?
Well, for me, is an agile organization that moves fast with purpose. And what I mean by that is, first and foremost, it's always taking that outside-in view of the world. I can tell you with my management teams, literally every week, we were not only just reviewing the business, but always looking at the business and competitive environment. What had gone on in the past week or two that we as a management team need to be cognizant of? Right. Whether, if central bank was taking an action, or we saw some of our competitors maybe introduce a new technology, or did an M&A transaction or something like that. We were always we forced ourselves to look at what was going on in the world and what did it mean for us. And that really provided us the motivation to be agile, to move fast. And what I mean by that is not kind of running with scissors, right? You don't want to be, taking all this undue risks in the business, but you have to be cognizant of the clock speed in the world around you. And then make sure that you have a process in your company to make decisions in a pretty quick way. Not shortchanging looking at the facts, as I said, not running with scissors, but also at the same time, not thinking that the market or competitors are going to wait for you to make decisions, and because you have a very bureaucratic process. So to me, that's what agile means. And the second thing it means is once you decide on a course of action, it doesn't mean it's set in stone. And I don't mean it's, management has ADD and we're switching plans all the time, but you have to course correct, getting back to the sailing.
Yes.
Analogy. There are going to be issues that affect your plan.
Yeah.
Okay, what tweaks do you have to make for it so that you can ultimately end up on the destination you want to be versus this is the plan, that's the way it's going to be, and who cares what the outside world is? We're implementing our plan.
Yeah. You've got to have those feedback loops and those learning cycles as an organization, so you're not totally staying oblivious of the outside world.
Yeah, and you got to be careful as a leader and as a management team to have 80% of the answer.
Yeah.
Right? If you're waiting for 100% of the answer, the market and the economy and you're going to lose.
Yeah.
But having 80% of the answer and then course correct along the way, I think that's what makes an agile organization, but more importantly, a successful agile organization.
Spot on. And Mark, obviously, no matter what industry you're in, technology is impacting you to varying degrees. Sometimes it's shaping you as an industry, right? The industry you've spent a lot of your time in automotive. Think about the car, right? There's more software going into a car than component parts now, right? But it's similar in other industries like banking, or retail, or manufacturing, or insurance, right? Everyone is going through a significant amount of investments in digital transformations, right? How do you think that's shaping, how companies operate, how they conduct their work, how they rethink their strategies? How do you think digital and digital transformation specifically is impacting?
Yeah. Well, it's impacting every business. I think first and foremost is making sure as a management team you understand what digital transformation means. I think there's a lot of executives and CEOs that use that term very, very liberally, and they have no idea what they're talking about. Right? But they have people, supposedly, that know what they're talking about. Yeah. And so, for me, when you talk about digital transformation, it's really about understanding what are the innovations that are out there and the enablers that you have on your radar screen as a company that will allow you to either be more productive, more cost efficient, more effective in generating revenue, things of that nature. And always having that scanning out to understand, gosh, if it's around enabling, product development, right? If you think about the auto industry, when we were developing cars, it's a big, massive, complex product.
Yeah.
And I was always working with my teams to figure out how can we make you more efficient?
Right.
How can we make ourselves more intelligent as an organization to make trade-offs? Because as you said, it's you have lots of things. Your eyes are always bigger than your stomach, right? In terms of the budgets that you have. And how do I make my people more effective, quality better, but also more efficient? And that becomes even more important now for a lot of businesses because, again, my learnings when I went through the Great Recession, we decided we were not going to let up one iota on product development.
Yeah.
And my philosophy was I would sell the furniture before we cut back on product programs because I was looking towards that 2 or 3 years out when we got through this period of time that we would have the products versus our competitors, a fresher line of products, a more expansive line of products that would then pay benefits for us.
Yeah.
So we looked at a lot of enablers around that. But I think you have to have, getting back to what we talked about earlier around digital transformation, is pick your shots.
Yeah.
What do you want to achieve? Scanning and understanding what are the innovations and technological enablers out there, and then how can you adopt them in the company to allow you to achieve your objectives and your strategies.
Yeah. So digital transformation, not just for the sake of digital transformation, but digital transformation helping you achieve, again, the business outcomes you're trying to achieve. I think that those are very wise words. And frankly, in many ways, technology is helping enable and helping us all reimagine many companies and industries. But you've got to still put that through the lens and the framework of prioritization, execution, and how does it impact those business metrics?
Right.
Yeah, very much so. This discussion can go on for another hour or so, Mark. But in the interest of time, we love to end these sessions with a list of pressed questions, where if I can ask you to just, keep the responses to 1 to 2 words, we'll have some fun with it.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
So that the audience gets to know you a little bit and at the same time gets your insights. So maybe the starting point would be, what's your first digital experience when you wake up in the morning?
And I'm glad you said digital experience.
Yeah.
So the first thing I do, the first hour of the day, I'm on my iPad and I'm completely focused on the external world. I'm going through all the various news websites to understand what's gone on in the world. Yeah. And I love looking at news sites that have, let's say, different approaches to their approaches to what's going on in the world, because I think it's really important always to get different points of view. Right. But I spend the first hour of the day just getting up to speed on what's going on in the world, whether it's economically, politically, or technologically in a lot of the industries that I'm involved in.
Makes a lot of sense. One word or phrase that you think is being overused these days?
The word is Okay, now you might say, why did you say that? As leaders, the most important thing we do is we communicate. And what I learned early on in my career, I was always talking and trying to, when I didn't have something to say or I was thinking, I'd fill that space with or
Yeah.
And somebody pointed out to me, they said, when you do that, it takes away from the points you're trying to make.
Right.
So I had to learn to be comfortable with pauses.
Yeah.
And I used to use it a lot. I see so many really effective leaders that use that. And again, it's all about communicating effectively and authentically to your teams and your companies. That's the most overused word.
Yeah.
And every language has Japanese, it's ano, and down in Argentina, it's este. It's everybody has their filler words.
Has it, yeah. I think I'm guilty of that too, and I need to improve on that front as well. So thanks for the pointer for that. Next question. Anyway, so when you think about the automotive industry and you spend all this time, within the automotive industry, in today's context, what's your favorite car?
That's like saying, what's your favorite child?
Yeah.
I love, of course, my favorite car is a Ford.
Of course.
But I have all kinds of favorites. But I do have a GT350R Shelby,
nice.
Which is it's fun to drive on the racetrack, but it's also fun to drive around town.
That's awesome. That sounds like a lot of fun.
It is.
We're gonna have to do that sometime together.
Exactly.
Yeah. Last question. Your one prediction for the second half of 2022?
It's going to be a lot of volatility in the second half of this year. My prediction is, and I don't ever, I'm a glass half full kind of guy, but I do see in the second half of the year, things are going to slow down economically faster than people expect. But then I also am a bit more optimistic 12 months from now, where I think things will pick up faster than people expect. But I think right now, every CEO, every CFO worth their salt is saying, hey, the second half of the year looks murky from a forecast standpoint. Yeah. So I'm going to be, very, very prudent in, costs going forward, hiring, and you're starting to see that. We have elections coming up also, at least here in this country, which will be interesting. So it's going to be a lot of volatility, but I think it's also going to be a great opportunity for management teams to get a lot of great experience and learnings during this period of time to position them well for when things become more stable.
That's a great note to end on. I mean, this time of uncertainty, potential slowdown can also be a great opportunity as well for organizations to really get to the next level,
exactly.
Upskill, get the right hygiene in place, etc. Mark, thank you so much for taking the time. This was so much fun. Really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you everyone for joining us. Hope you enjoyed that. See you next time.